Well, state officials are looking at what for years was considered a nuisance, now as a tool to fight wildfires and repair waterways.
They said it was impossible. Releasing beavers into Utah's desert was called ecological suicide by experts.
All of these beavers were captured from areas where burrowing activity was impacting infrastructure.
The San Rafael River was dying, a barren stream that barely flowed through one of America's most unforgiving landscapes. Water temperatures soared over 100 degrees, vegetation was virtually non-existent, and the intermittent flow meant the river disappeared completely during dry seasons.
California's drought is a multi-billion-dollar issue, but climate scientists are finding that working with nature could be more effective.
Desert ecologists declared it madness. Beavers can't survive in the desert, they said. This is a waste of resources that will end in disaster. Water management agencies worried about precious water being diverted. Local ranchers feared flooding and property damage. Even wildlife managers questioned whether these water-loving animals could possibly adapt to one of the harshest environments on Earth. But in 2019, a small team of scientists decided to try the impossible. They released 19 beavers into this dying desert river system. What happened next shocked the scientific community, transformed an entire ecosystem, and proved that nature's engineers could work miracles even in the most unlikely places. Behind the scenes, something extraordinary was taking shape, quietly, patiently, and relentlessly. And the transformation that followed would rewrite everything scientists thought they knew about desert restoration. Welcome to Forgotten Lands, where we uncover the impossible transformations that changed everything.
It's about what that animal can do.
To understand the magnitude of what these 19 beavers accomplished, you need to see what they were up against. The San Rafael River in Utah's desert was essentially a death sentence for any water-dependent species. Summer temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The river flow was so intermittent that entire sections would dry up for months at a time, leaving behind cracked mud and scattered pools of stagnant water. The landscape was brutal. Unlike the lush forests where beavers traditionally thrive, this desert offered virtually no aspen or willow trees, the primary food sources that beavers depend on for survival. The few plants that existed were thorny desert shrubs that seemed completely unsuitable for beaver consumption. The scientific skepticism was overwhelming. Previous attempts at desert restoration had failed spectacularly. Researchers pointed to studies showing that beavers required specific habitat conditions that simply didn't exist in Utah's arid landscape. The intermittent water flow alone should have made it impossible for beavers to establish permanent dams. This is throwing money into a black hole, critics argued. Desert rivers are too dynamic, too unpredictable. These beavers will either die or abandon the site within months. Hydrologists warned that the extreme temperature fluctuations and seasonal droughts would make it impossible for beavers to maintain their dams. The research team had been studying desert restoration for years, and their data seemed to support the skeptics. Previous translocation attempts had shown poor survival rates and low site fidelity. The harsh desert conditions appeared to be an insurmountable barrier to successful beaver establishment. If you're fascinated by stories of animals achieving the impossible in the world's harshest environments, comment beavers below and let me know what you think about nature's ability to adapt and thrive anywhere. The release day arrived with little fanfare. 19 beavers, each fitted with VHF tracking tags, were carefully transported to strategic locations along the San Rafael River. The scientific team expected to document another failed translocation attempt, gathering data on why desert beaver reintroduction was impossible. The first few weeks seemed to confirm the skeptics' predictions. The beavers appeared disoriented in the alien landscape. Some wandered far from the river, seemingly searching for the familiar forest habitat they had been taken from. Researchers tracked several individuals moving erratically, and early reports suggested the project was heading toward predictable failure. But then something unexpected began happening. The beavers started adapting in ways that shocked the scientific community. They began working with existing human-made structures called beaver dam analogs, creating hybrid engineering systems that were more effective than either human or natural construction alone. The transformation was subtle at first. Small modifications to existing structures, strategic placement of additional materials, gradual improvements to water retention. But within 6 months, the changes became impossible to ignore. The dying river was coming back to life. Where once there had been intermittent trickles of water, permanent pools began forming behind the beaver-enhanced dams. The water table started rising, creating moisture gradients that hadn't existed in decades. Desert plants that had been struggling to survive suddenly found themselves with reliable water access for the first time in years. The visual transformation was breathtaking. Satellite images from before and after the beaver release showed a dramatic change from brown, barren streambed to ribbons of green vegetation following the river's path. The contrast was so stark that researchers initially thought there had been an error in the imaging. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Fish species that hadn't been seen in the San Rafael River for over a decade began reappearing. Native desert fish that had been pushed to the brink of extinction suddenly had habitat again. Amphibian species that researchers thought had been locally extirpated started showing up in the newly created wetland areas. The beavers had done something that millions of dollars in traditional restoration efforts had failed to achieve. They had created a functioning desert oasis from a dying river system. If this incredible story of ecological resurrection is inspiring you, hit that like button and subscribe to Forgotten Lands for more stories of nature's most impossible transformations. The scientific community was stunned. Researchers who had predicted failure were now witnessing one of the most successful desert restoration projects in North American history. The beavers had not only survived in the desert, they had thrived beyond all expectations. Their population had grown from the original 19 individuals to over 40 within 2 years. More importantly, they had created a network of interconnected wetland habitats that supported dozens of species that had been absent from the area for decades. The water retention capabilities of the beaver-enhanced dams exceeded all projections. During the severe drought of 2021, when most desert streams completely dried up, the San Rafael River maintained flowing water throughout the summer. The beaver dams had created a buffer against climate extremes that traditional engineering approaches had never achieved. The ripple effects extended far beyond the immediate river system. The elevated water table began supporting vegetation growth hundreds of yards from the river channel. Desert shrubs that had been stunted and struggling suddenly flourished with access to groundwater. The green corridor created by the beaver activity became visible from space, a verdant ribbon cutting through the brown desert landscape. Bird species that hadn't been documented in the area for over 20 years began returning. Migratory waterfowl started using the beaver ponds as stopover sites during their desert crossings. The acoustic landscape changed as the sounds of flowing water and wildlife replaced the silence of the dying desert. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the transformation was how the beavers had adapted their behavior to desert conditions. They learned to build dams using desert vegetation that scientists had assumed was unsuitable. They modified their feeding habits to include plants that weren't part of their traditional diet. They even adjusted their activity patterns to avoid the extreme heat of desert summers. The success of the Utah Desert Beaver Project has revolutionized thinking about ecosystem restoration in arid environments. Scientists who once dismissed the idea as impossible are now studying the techniques for application in other desert regions. The hybrid approach of combining human-made structures with natural beaver engineering has become a model for restoration projects across the American Southwest. Today, as you drive through Utah's desert landscape, you can see the green ribbon of the San Rafael River cutting through the brown terrain like an emerald necklace. Where once there was a dying stream in a barren wasteland, there's now a thriving wetland ecosystem that supports hundreds of species and provides critical habitat in one of America's most challenging environments. The 19 beavers that scientists said couldn't survive in the desert have created one of the most successful restoration stories in modern conservation history. They proved that with the right approach, even the most impossible landscapes can be transformed into thriving ecosystems. From dying desert river to flourishing oasis, from scientific skepticism to conservation triumph, from 19 beavers to a restored ecosystem, Utah's desert transformation proved that sometimes the most extraordinary solutions come from trusting nature's own engineers to work their ancient magic even in the most unlikely places.